Okay. Good morning, everybody. I apologize for my voice today. Allergies, a little bit of laryngitis, so hope we can get through it. Purim is coming up this weekend, and I just want to make some observations about how to celebrate Purim from several different perspectives. What happened on Purim, the reason for our joy and perhaps frivolity on Purim, is that the Jews in most of Asia Minor were saved from destruction. It wasn't just Jews in one city, it was Jews Mehodu Viat Kush, Achashverosh's reign, whoever Achashverosh may have been, Xerxes or somebody else, whoever he may have been, he ruled what became, eventually the large empire. And throughout history, if you Google Purim, you'll find that there were many, many Purims in Jewish history, many communities, Frankfurt Purim, the Cairo Purim, many communities who were threatened with extinction or destruction or pogroms or what have you, and through some means, whether it was a miraculous mean or a victory or bribery, they were saved. Annually, they would celebrate that day as a Purim. I said Cairo, Frankfurt, many, many other cities had a day of celebration of Purim. So we now, after the events of Purim took place, Chazal, at the encouragement of Esther and Mordechai, declared Purim a festive event to celebrate the saving of a large segment of the Jewish community, the majority of the Jewish community at that time. And how do we celebrate Purim? So we celebrate it by sharing our joy. We support the poor, we give gifts to the poor, we read the story of Purim, Mikra Megillah, we send gifts of food to each other. A celebration of a friendly type of thing. And since all of the events, and this is the key point that we're going to get to, since all of the events leading to the salvation of the Jewish community throughout the empire of Achashverosh, everything, if you look at the Megillah very carefully, everything took place at a mishteh, a meal. And a mishteh is not just a meal. Mishteh comes from the word to drink. There was liquor served. The meal that Achashverosh had to celebrate his coronation, his victory over all the other nations, every time that Esther invited them, there was wine served. So because everything took place, and everything, again, it's fascinating to see that all of these quote-unquote coincidences were not really coincidences, even though God's name is not mentioned specifically. In the Megillah, his guiding hand is there. Everything took place through drinking. And the drinking was primarily wine. Even though, and it says, V'hashtia kados, and the drinking was what anybody wanted to drink, they would give him. It was primarily wine. Hard liquor was not really something that was imbibed at these meals. But any intoxicating beverage. Okay, so we have a number of issues to talk about briefly, because we don't have time to go through all in detail. The notion of drinking on Purim in general. How much should you drink? How much do you have to drink? Do you have to drink at all? The nature of some of the costumes that people wear, questionable in some cases. Reckless behavior, sometimes destructive as a result of drinking. And the very famous Purim spiels that used to take place, which might border on issues of leitzonus or lashon hara. You don't see the type of Purim spiels you used to have. Traditionally, and we'll get to this later, traditionally in the yeshivos, they appointed a Purim rabbi, a Purim rav, and he would give drashos, making fun of certain individuals, certain people, but in a very clever way. And sometimes some of this cleverness can border into perhaps lashon hara or leitzonus, problematic. When Rav Kook was a student in Volozhin, and the Netziv was the Rosh Yeshiva, so Rav Kook, as a young man, was the Purim Rav, and he made fun of the Netziv in a very respectful way, but he imitated him, he spoke like him, and this is what was done at yeshivos. Fast forward many generations, a few generations later, the Netziv's great-grandson was the Purim Rav at Mossad HaRav Kook, when Rav Kook was the Rosh Yeshiva, and he did it to him. So he got his revenge. I remember at YU, when I was at YU, the Purims, they had fantastic Purim spiels until eventually they stopped doing it because there was a riot. That's another story. And the Purim spiels were in Yiddish. There was one night when, because there were Purim parties at NYU and Columbia and NYU, and it turned out that the nights were different, and everybody came to YU, and there was a riot, literally a riot. Police had to be called. People couldn't get in there. So they, anyhow, but at the Purim spiels that before the riot took place, in Yiddish, very, very clever. I remember on the 75th anniversary of the founding of Yeshiva, there was a Purim spiel. Ayin Hay is 75. The Purim Rav that year was Ray Safra, Olav Shalom. He was the founder of Tablet K, Ashkacha. And Rav Safra led a Levaya. The casket was YU. And he was saying, Ayin Hay, 75 years. What has YU been producing? Ayin Hay, Amei Haaretz. But it was very clever how he did it. Well, one year I was given the privilege of singing the Grammar. And I had to write the Grammar. And again, you have to be very, very clever. And I still remember some of the Yiddish Grammar. Rav Lesson was the Mashgiach. Wonderful, wonderful man. Wonderful. He earned his salary just by walking in front of yeshiva. I mean, just upright, straight, wonderful man. Two-pointed beard. He didn't speak English. He wrote a number of svarim, very important Musar svarim, and he used to go around to all the shiurim giving Musar in Yiddish, which most guys didn't understand. And in the Beis Medrash every night, at 9:45, he'd also give a Musar shmooze. And a lot of guys would go out for a smoke, then take a break, or whatever. So I referenced this in the Grammar. Musar is a wichtige Sache. Musar is very important. Mashgiach learned us yedanach. Mashgiach learns this, teaches it every night. Aber wenn it's kommt, at 9:15, when it's 9:45, nebech elate the lesson allein. Lesson, the play on words, lesson, Rav lesson, and he's all. Anyhow, the point of the Purim spiel is to be clever, but sometimes it borders into lashon hara and leitzonus. And I remember once. Anyhow, there were great Purim spiels in all the yeshivas. Let's talk about drinking for a moment, because that's a very important issue, and sometimes it gets out of hand. The Gemara quotes Rava, Megillah, that you have to drink on Purim ad lo yada ben oror haman leborach morach. Very famous quote. You have to drink enough so you don't know the difference between oror, cursed be Haman, and blessed be Mordechai. And that's a pretty straightforward comment. It's followed right afterwards with a phenomenal story. Rabbi and Rab Zera, good friends, chavrusas, and they had a Purim Suda, and they got drunk. And they were so drunk that Rabbi actually killed Rab Zera. The language slaughtered him, killed him. The next day, Rabbi realized what he had done, and he prayed, and there was Tchiyas HaMesim, and he was able to resurrect Rab Zera, bring it back to life. So the Rishonim asked the obvious question: how can it be such a requirement to drink when behavior such as this contradicts Torah values? It seems like it's a contradiction. Drink, and then But what happens when you drink too much? Terrible things can happen. So you're supposed to get drunk. Why do they follow up with a story that tells you pretty much the opposite message?
You're supposed to drink wine to remember Mishneh Hayai. Nobody says you have to get drunk.
You're right. That's what I said before we came in. However, the quote in the Gemara is you have to drink enough. How much should you drink? Do I drink enough so you can't tell the difference between Cursed be Haman and Baruch be Mordechai? Or Haman and Baruch. That's how much. In order to drink that much, to know not to know the difference, you're pretty much drunk. We'll see how this is fine-tuned. I mean, the Rishonim, the vast majority of Rishonim and Achronim, the vast majority of them say, don't take it literally. It's a mitzvah to drink, to celebrate, but not to get stupid drunk. I remember Rav Lifshitz at Chasadik Livracha always used to make a point before Purim. There's a difference between Simcha Shel Mitzvah and Simcha Shel Hololus. If you're doing something to fulfill a mitzvah, the joy of Purim, but the other people just go wild just for sake of going wild. And that's wrong. A lot of different Rishonim, basically the normative psak, not everybody necessarily, the normative psak is to drink more than you usually drink. Because again, as was just said, all the events of Purim took place during around a table where there was drinking. I remember a number of years ago, I was teaching at the Masifta of Clifton, and I gave a shiur on this topic, and I brought down all the Rishonim and all the Achronim, every single source that I could find on why you shouldn't get drunk on Purim. Drink a little bit, but not. These are high school kids. Comes the Purim Chagiga, and the Rosh Hashiva was there, and he agreed with me, and another Rabbi was there. Comes the Purim Chagiga, and this music and this dancing, and everybody's in a costume. It's love, very freilich. But then, off to the side in the kitchen, arranged on the table are bottles and bottles of very expensive scotch and bourbon and vodka. The parents brought it in. And these are kids who aren't legally allowed to drink. So, unfortunately, in some circles, this becomes a major mitzvah. Yeah.
So, various Shiur and wars, other rabbis, you bring in more contemporary rabbis that give a psak, that change or modify things that have been through the years, perhaps being more lenient or understanding as modern society brings up different issues. Years ago, the Jewish communities had their heads in the sand, and there was no such thing as Jewish alcoholics and all that kind of stuff. Well, it's very clear that Jewish alcoholism is a big issue. And is there any contemporary, rabbi that has had the guts, to come out and be even more mayfield on this drinking? Because it's
I would say that the vast majority of Rishonim and Achronim, you drink more than you usually drink, period. You shouldn't get drunk, because when you're drunk, you're behaving in a way that's contrary to Torah values. So you don't need contemporary poskim to say that. That's the halacha. I mean, I can quote you all. I mean, Rav Aaron HaKohen and the Meiri. There's a lot of, the Meiri has a very opposite. He says you shouldn't drink in a way that degrades yourself. Make sure that it leads to simcha, not hololus. In other words, you drink a little bit more than you know. If you don't drink at all, have a cup of wine. Look, the Vilna Gaon Suda on Purim lasted from morning until night. He sat at the table all day long. People came, obviously. I guarantee he didn't get roaring drunk. He had a few sips. When we used to go visit my Rabbi on Purim, they also didn't get drunk. They were happy. They had a little bit of wine, but nobody got drunk. The contemporary issue of alcoholism is very, very serious, and especially among certain yeshivas, where this becomes the ikra. And it's not. Basically, the story of Rabbi and Rab Zera is recorded to teach you that you shouldn't get drunk. So we have to understand, what does it mean not to know the difference between Oror Haman and Baruch Mordechai? There's a lot of different interpretations. So one pshat, which is brought down by the Ramah in two places, in Darkei Moshe and in Shulchan Aruch, he says basically, drink so you get sleepy. And if you fall asleep, you wouldn't know the difference between Oror Haman and Baruch Mordechai. And that's brought down by many Meforshim. There's another one, fascinating. The gematria of Oror Haman and Baruch Mordechai is the same, 502. Okay? If you drank so much that you can't do the calculation anymore, you've reached the halakhic level of not knowing the difference between Oror Haman and Baruch Mordechai. Very similar to the Rabbi Yerucham. The Rambam states basically, if you fall asleep, well, when you're asleep, you don't know the difference anyway, which is brought down by the Shulchan Aruch. I'll get to it in a moment. The purpose of drinking is to bring simcha. If it causes you to get sick and to throw up and behave inappropriately, that's not simple. That's not simple. The Shulchan Aruch. The Shulchan Aruch quotes the Gemara, but the Ramah, which is our posek, clarifies it for us. Shulchan Aruch says very clearly, Chayiv inish lebesume bepuria ad lo yoda ben Oror Haman and Baruch Mordechai. That's an obligation. What exactly it means, the Ramah explains. He says, V'yesh omrim de'ein tzorich lehishtaker kol kach. The Ramah, who is a posek for Ashkenazic Jewry, says it's not appropriate to get drunk. Ela sheyishte yoter milimudo, a little more than you usually drink. And maybe if Yishon, you'll fall asleep. Umitok sheyishon ena yodeya ben Oror Haman and Baruch Mordechai. So when you're sleeping, you don't know the difference. There's another, if I can find the other one. Oh, the Maharil, interestingly enough, the Maharil, who the Sefer Minhagim is pretty much the code book for all of our Ashkenazic Minhagim. He says that drinking on Purim is not required. Very clearly, it's an optional mitzvah, he says. That's the Maharil, and he's the reliable source. The only requirement is to have mishteh, and you can have a mishteh without getting drunk. Take a sip. All right. So basically, bottom line, drink a little bit on Purim, and it refers to wine, not whiskey or beer. If you don't drink at all, have a sip. If you do drink occasionally, take a few sips. But that's it. You don't have to go crazy. Okay. Another thing we do on Purim is wear costumes. Again, the whole reason of costumes is v'nahafochu, right? Everything is a topsy-turvy. Everything turned around. They wanted to kill the Jews, and instead the Jews killed them. Fine. So there are issues about the costumes. First of all, men shouldn't dress up as women. Women shouldn't dress up as men. It's a big issue. Cross-dressing. People did it. People still do it. The Isur is a biblical Isur. The Torah says men shouldn't wear female garments and women shouldn't wear male garments. So the purpose, the way most Mefarshim understand that, is to dress like the opposite sex for inappropriate purposes, for znus purposes and so forth. But if you're doing it for simcha, there are those who can, they recognize that people do it, and it's being done for simcha. It's not being done for any inappropriate reasons. So, but it's better not to cross-dress on Purim. There are enough costumes out there. People don't have to cross-dress. It's Simchas Purim, and therefore, according to many, they kind of wink at it. Another issue, though, a more serious issue, are the costumes that people wear, do they contain shatnez? I don't know if you heard that being raised before. Can you wear a costume of one day if it has shatnez in it? Clearly, you shouldn't. Although I've never seen Purim costumes with a shatnez label, but it's an interesting question. It's also customary in some places, to steal and to steal people's wallets or their hats or their shoes. Again, it shouldn't be done to damage anything. If it's done in a simchadic way, and everyone understands that the simchadic way, again, the fine line between simcha and hololus has to be mediated sometimes. There are many, many things. The Purim parodies, the Purim spiels are very clever. There is, by the way, you should look it up. You get a copy of it. It's a fascinating little booklet called Maseches Purim. Maseches Purim, very cleverly written book. I don't know exactly when it came out, but Maseches Purim is basically talking about drinking. And it talks about, and it takes lines to the Gemara. When can you begin drinking? Is it 6 hours before, 6 hours? It's a very clever parody, and it's 50 pages long. Some perushim on the side, but it's a very, very clever parody about mostly about drinking on Purim. If you have a copy, I don't know if it's ever been translated into English, but it's a cute little booklet to have. It's just part of Simchas Purim. What else? I want to say something else here, but I can't find it. All right, in any event, so Purim in general, when it comes to Simcha, we have to walk a fine line sometimes, because sometimes Simcha can go too far. And when it goes beyond what is normally acceptable and damages occur, clothing gets ripped or people get insulted. The Rambam talks about the Shvil HaZahav, the middle road. You want to be clever, you want to be funny, but you don't want to insult people. You don't want to make fun of them in a way that could be, and this happens sometimes. I mean, sometimes a Purim rabbi will go too far and insult the Rosh Yeshiva. Now, again, it's all the spirit of good fun, but sometimes a little bit too sharp. So one has to be very, very careful. I don't know if the shul still does a Purim spiel. They used to do it a couple of times. They still do that. But one has to be, the middle road is always important in terms of drinking, in terms of which costumes you wear, in terms of how we behave on Purim. We celebrate as a community by sharing our good luck, by giving gifts to the poor, by giving gifts of food to our friends, by having friends and family over for a Purim Seudah. All of this is an imitation of the Seudos that were held that ultimately led to the salvation of the Jews, both in Shushan and throughout Asia Minor. Yeah.
I'm sorry I keep harping on this. I have a real problem. I know that it says, if you don't drink, have a sip. If you drink, just have a little bit more than you normally do, that kind of thing. We're talking about what goes on in some yeshivas and in some communities in Cloud, going overboard.
Right.
And I'm just thinking of all the mitzvahs or trying to be a role model example that are being destroyed by many adults. I remember when my son was in NCSY and he went somewhere for him, and they were like a speck short of opening his mouth and forcing him to drink something. And I just don't get it.
You're right.
You're a bad example to your kids, to any kids at your Suda. Chas v'shalom, you get behind a wheel of drive.
So
it's just, there's got to be stricter.
There's
enforcement.
an even more serious issue, and that of the Chil Hashem aspect. Unfortunately, in many communities, the emergency service people expect to pump out a lot of stomachs on Purim. People get drunk, and the police are aware of car accidents, people driving drunk. And the same way the fire department is aware of all these people that go checking for chametz with actual candles instead of a flashlight. Unfortunately, sometimes it's a big problem. The Vilna Gaon gives us an answer to the question in general. There are two mitzvos. There are two mitzvos that are fascinating. There is a mitzvah to eat on Erev Yom Kippur with kavanah, to eat in order to fast. The mitzvah. There's also another mitzvah, not related to that, not to learn Torah on Tisha B'Av, because Torah gladdens the heart. Okay? The Vilna Gaon, given who he was, said, if these are my only two averos, that I didn't have kavanah when I had my Suda HaMafsekes before Yom Kippur, and that I learned Torah on Tisha B'Av, I'm okay. That should be my biggest sins. So again, people take this one mitzvah of drinking and they blow it up, and it's wrong. And why there isn't, and I agree, why there isn't more of a concerted effort among the Rosh Yeshiva to cut down on it and come out with more pronouncements, I can't answer that. Perhaps it's one of the few times during the year when the Bachrim can let loose, because all year long they're restricted so many ways. I can't rationalize it. I'm sure they do. But again, the Rov Deos, vast, with very few exceptions, most poskim would tell you it is definitely not a mitzvah to get roaring drunk on Purim, period, sof pasuk. That's it. Drink a little more than you normally drink. That's the psak halach.
Other mitzvahs that people do the letter of the law, but not the intent of the law. Like shaking, like dressing tzniustic.
Yeah.
Yeah, but still skin tight, you see everything.
Yeah, I 100%. I know the daughter of a very prominent Rosh Yeshiva, Beis Yaakov. She taught many yeshivas, rebelled against that notion, and she wore very, very tight clothing as a result. That showed everything, but she was fully covered. So nobody could complain about it. And that was a rebellious stage. But you're right, 100%. The letter of the law, the spirit of the law is very, very important. The letter of the law, clearly, the Shulchan Aruch says, get drunk. But the Ramah very clearly says that's not what it means, get drunk. It means drink more than you usually do. It puts you to sleep, fine. Then you're kind not knowing the difference between Or, Haman, and Baruch Mordechai. Because when you're asleep, you don't know the difference. But there are other issues too, because when you get drunk, you can't perform. A shikar is part of a mitzvos. You can't do mitzvos when you're drunk. So there are clearly many, many reasons. We celebrate Purim through all the different ways. Better people should give more matonos levyonim than to get more drunk. Huh? Can't bench Brazil. There are so many things. There are so many reasons why. And again, I remember going to my Rebbe's house every Purim, and Talmidim from generations would come, and he's sitting there all day long. And now he's a little bit, I would say tipsy, maybe, but everybody comes, he drinks a l'chaim with a little sip, because after a day of greeting all of his old Talmidim, it adds up. But he was fine. He wasn't drunk. And that's what Purim is all, that's what Simchas Purim is all about. So hopefully you'll enjoy your Mishteh b'simcha, and the Mishteh should be, in every other case, in moderation. And I think that's the lesson of all of these things, moderation. And try not to wear a shotness costume. Have a wonderful day.
Thank
Thank
you.
you, Molly. Thank you.
Have a good day, everybody.
Good day.
Have a good day.
Have a good day, Drew.
We have a
From
lady.
somebody else.
Rabbi Side of Arech. Yishem Orach Be'etov Yadollah. B'shus Kol Mesugim Kan. V'rech Shechal Mishalo. Baruch She'achalnu Mishalo. Tuvo Chayinu. Uftuvo Hagadol. Tomi Lo Chazayim. Ki hu el zon uvanes lakom. Mechiv lakom. Mechid bazon. Chol v'yasov. Asher Baruch. Baruch Ato Adonai Hazon Es Hakol. Oh, no. The Al Hakol. Baruch Ato Adonai Al Ones V'Al Amazon. Uvenei Yerushalayim Era Kodesh Meira V'Yameinu Baruch Ato Adonai V'nei Beracham Bo Yerushalayim Amen. Who hated, who made you, who go along, who goes. Revachat Solav Yaslam Rabbi Yeshua Nechama. Yikol Tov Yalamai Chasreinu. Yes.